/infodom /pacing. This one is a little bit harder to explain, but you'll get a feel for it as I talk about it, all right? Really, these two guys are going to separate the amateurs from the pros in page number 1. All right? Now, there's all sorts of other cool stuff that you should be doing on page number 1, starting with motion and that sort of thing. And I'll probably end up talking a little bit about that today. But let's zero in on this first one, viewpoint. And let's talk about the basics, viewpoint and tense first, okay? Now, our basic viewpoints are the ones that you all know. There's no reason to have that. Are the ones you all know, right? Okay, let's list them off. First person.
Second person.
Choose your own adventure, come on.
Second person.
That's true.
Second person. Why are you even mentioning? Okay, there's 2 types of third person. Limited. And third, omniscient. Blah blah blah. Okay. These are your basic viewpoints. What are your basic tenses? Did someone really say future? You were just saying things. Yeah. Okay. That would have been really. Has anyone read a book in future tense? Okay. I actually have seen a story in second-person future tense. You will go to the door and you will answer it. But yeah, well, that's called writing student takes a master's degree writing class and thinks that they're doing something avant-garde. That's what that is. So, past, present. So, let's talk about these as tools. The first thing to mention is that, really honestly, these two are pretty interchangeable. Now, most of you in this room will have a preference for one of the two because of what you've read a lot of, and it's probably going to be past for most of you in this room. A few of you, it might be present. Does anyone have a preference for present? Usually, if you've been reading a lot of literary fiction, you'll have a present tense bias. If you've been reading a lot of market fiction, you'll have a past tense bias. That's just because that's kind of how they run.
Explain literary market.
Literary fiction? Literary fiction is stuff that wins the National Book Award. What's good literary fiction that's being published nowadays? I mean, I always go back to things like Beloved. Grapes of Wrath isn't because it's too old, but stuff that's been published in the last 30 years.
I've just noticed that a lot of YA books nowadays are in present.
Yeah, a lot of YA are in present too. That's getting back to the topic. More and more YA are in present, but those two are really interchangeable. Literary fiction is stuff that would win awards. It's things that sell really well on the coast. It's what a lot of the creative writing classes will talk about. There's some cool stuff that goes on with it, but literary fiction does tend to focus on the poetry of the language and with new experience. Meaning, we try to write something that's never been written before, and we try to do it in an avant-garde sort of way, or things like that. I mean, and who writes literary fiction is going to differ depending on who you talk to, who they put in that group. But there's some cool stuff going on in literary fiction. But market fiction is what we call, the distinction is generally comes down to, they would talk about popular fiction as being plot focused while they're character focused. That's kind of a difficult thing to define because we're character focused too, but we're character focused in a different way. They're character focused in, this is a different, unique, weird experience in a character. And we're focused on, this is a relatable, interesting person that you want to read about or you want to be. And those are two very different different things that people try to attempt. So, anyway. Present is much more common, and it is becoming fairly prevalent in YA as well, in children's. But the two are very interchangeable. They really are. You may not believe me on this, but they really are. The only times you notice a difference is if someone's switching back and forth, or if you're used to one and you start a book that's the other. But most of us, after a little ways, will just be used to it. So you don't have to worry about this. Your default in most genres that you'll be writing this class should be past. If you have no good reason to do present, just do past. If you prefer present, go ahead and do it. Does that make sense? Present is kind of looked down upon in market fiction because there are so many people who read it and who read past, and so your book can be jarring and look bad to a new reader. So if you're writing epic fantasy, I would strongly suggest just doing past. If you're writing children's, though, you can go either way. If you're writing something more science fiction or a little more avant-garde, you can do present and no one will bat an eye at you. Speed of Dark by Elizabeth Moon, switch between the two of these. If you want to learn kind of how the different feels of them are, go look at Speed of Dark. It's a great example of someone using past and present and switching back and forth in a very effective way. Okay? So, that shouldn't be much of a consideration for you. What should be is whether you're going to go first, third, or third. Let's talk about this one next, because moving up the scale of things that you probably should default away from doing is omniscient. Omniscient has fallen out of favor recently. Recently being the last 20 years or 30 years of fiction, and particularly in popular fiction, the sort of stuff we're talking about in this class. It's fallen out of favor. It is not completely gone. There are still good books written in omniscient, but most people have started defaulting to one of these two. And so if you have no good reason for doing this, don't do it. What would be good reasons for doing omniscient? First, does anyone not know the difference between third limited and third omniscient? Okay, great. You're all in college and you've got that one. That's good. Occasionally I have someone who doesn't know, but that's great. You all get a gummy bear. I'm not going to throw them at you. What would be a good reason to use the omniscient?
If you're a mind reader or a god.
Okay, your character is a mind reader or a god. That would actually be a pretty good reason to do omniscient. What's another good reason?
Wouldn't that still be third-person limited?
It would probably be technically third-person limited. They just know everything. Why would you use omniscient? Okay, you both get a gummy bear because those are both good comments.
I'm bad at catching.
What's that?
I'm bad at catching.
That's all right. So, what would be a good reason? Why would you ever want to use omniscient?
If you want to jump from one storyline to another within the same book.
No, because limited does that. Limited, the definition for limited is one at a time in a scene. Okay? Omniscient changes in scene, usually paragraph by paragraph. And to make this, wow, I spelled paragraph really strangely. To make this, by the way, you can have a gummy bear. Who was that? Was you? Yay! So to make this a little easy for you, I kind of view omniscient as having two broad-based sort of ways that it is done. And one of them is body hopper. And one of them is actually kind of a little bit more of a hidden narrator. Wow, you can't even read that. That's okay. So body hopper is the true third-person omniscient. This is where, when you go into a scene, paragraph by paragraph, you are changing viewpoints and seeing everybody's thoughts. When someone says something, you then say what they are thinking. And you can, at any point in the narrative, show what anyone is thinking at any time. Dune does this really, really effectively. Okay? It's probably the poster child for third omniscient of this style because it was done very intentionally and it was right at the cusp of when people are moving to limited. But Herbert did omniscient and he seemed very self-aware in my reading of it of what he was doing with his omniscient. So in a given chapter, you'll have a paragraph from Paul's viewpoint and it'll show what he's thinking. And then you'll have a paragraph from someone else's viewpoint and he'll show what they're thinking in thought sort of things. I wonder what's going on, Paul thought. I wonder what's going on. whatever his name is, Patrick Stewart thought. What's his name? Gurney. Yeah. So, yeah.
But just because the narrator might be omniscient doesn't mean they have to tell everything always, right?
Not necessarily, but that's one of the reasons why omniscient is so hard, is because you start building this reader expectation that the reader is going to be able to see from everyone's viewpoint and perspective, and if you start not showing from certain people's perspective, it breaks the illusion of the story. And so it can be very destructive to not show everything when you're doing a body hopper thing like this. For instance, Dune again is a great example of this. When the person who's going to betray them walks onto the stage, he very quickly tells you in his head, I'm planning to betray these people and I'm a bad guy. Which in limited would be like playing your hand out. It's like showing everyone your ace. In omniscient, you have to build your tension in a different way because you always know what the bad guys are up to and who the bad guys are. You can't have someone secretly being, against the team because it feels like you're cheating if you are. Does that make sense? That's why this is such a challenge. The other reason it's such a challenge is it gets very complicated very quickly, and it can make the reader feel very at sea. The hidden narrator thing is is another type of omniscient, another flavor of omniscient. This is what something like The Hobbit is in. If you read The Hobbit, it feels like someone is sitting down and telling you a story, and they will occasionally kind of dip into people's thoughts for you and tell you how they're feeling, but it's almost like there's a camera, and you're not going into people's thoughts and feelings that often, except when the narrator starts talking about it. This is any time a book says, what he didn't know was, you are in omniscient with a hidden narrator. Okay? Does that make sense? That's a really good indication of it being an omniscient. And Tolkien will do this. Bilbo didn't know at the time, but it feels like your grandfather sat down to tell you a story about this guy Bilbo. And it can be a very effective storytelling method, but again, it's quite a challenge because of the fact that this one's challenge is it takes a few steps back from the characters, and so it makes you have a little distance from the characters, which can be a bad thing or a good thing. But usually in today's present market, it's viewed as a bad thing. People really want engaging characters right up front. This is particularly true in YA, where the voice of your protagonist in your first few pages is really going to be what makes your book sink or swim. Okay? So, that's a rough explanation of omniscient. Most of you should not be writing omniscient. If there's one or two of you in the class who are really omniscient junkies and you already know about all this stuff, then go ahead and write in it. If you aren't, do some research first and find out what you want to do before you write omniscient. That doesn't preclude you from making intentional viewpoint errors on occasion, stylistically, and picking third limited. Good example of this is The Wheel of Time. If any of you have read it, the first paragraph of chapter 1 of every book is an omniscient, and it kind of zoom out and see the whole world, and then it zooms into a perspective, and the rest of the entire book is in limited. And you'll occasionally see devices like this done in books. You'll find that people will begin each chapter with kind of almost a wide shot, and then a zoom in, and then they pick their character. Or they'll end some chapters with a zoom out. And those things are fine. I'd stay away from them unless unless they're really a device that you think will really enhance your book. Just because starting off particularly, I would try and learn one of these two styles or both of them really strongly before you move into stuff like that. But there's nothing wrong with doing that.